Let's cultivate our motivation. So we give ourselves and others a lot of labels, a lot of identities. So we have a lot of nouns associated with ourselves. I am a this, I am a that, according to race, religion, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic class, education level, country of origin, political party, sexual orientation, you name it. We have identities regarding it, and we give ourselves a lot of nouns, and we give others a lot of nouns. And so sometimes these are just these identities based on different qualities. Sometimes the nouns are names we call people. Somebody's a jerk, somebody's idiot, somebody's, I better not say the rest of them, but you know what I mean. And so we put people in these different categories, put ourselves in these different categories. And doing this can make it very difficult to have compassion, especially when we give nouns to people that are calling them names or calling ourselves a name. Difficult to then think that that person is not that name that we've called them. Even when we give ourselves conventional identities and names, and others those identities and names, again, that can be the cause of conflict, the cause of difficulty in communication, because we have the idea that nobody can actually understand our own experience who isn't of the same group that we are. But even within that group, nobody can completely understand our experience because we belong to other groups. And even if everybody has exactly the same labels as we do, still we can't understand each other's experiences. So we get quite locked into feeling isolated from others, and then we accuse others of not understanding us, and so on. And I think it would do us well to put a lot of that down and not see the world through those particular categories. Not develop lots of identities and hold on to them. Not to think that nobody understands us because of our unique identities. And not to think that we can't understand others either because of their unique identities, because that leaves us all pretty stuck, doesn't it? And then His Holiness comes along and says, we're all the same human being. We all want happiness. We all want to be free of suffering. We all are struggling with a body that gets born old, sick, and dies. We all struggle with not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, losing what we have. And we all have the capacity for loving kindness, for compassion, for forgiveness, for wisdom. So we can see each other as isolated, independent things that are disconnected and can't understand each other and therefore can't get along. Or we can see ourselves, not all others, as connected sentient beings with many common traits and qualities, and then feel connected and understood by others and understanding others. So it's our choice what we happen to focus on. So we need to think carefully about what we choose. And it is a choice. Even if society puts us in a lot of categories, we don't have to make those categories a big deal. Or we can make those categories a big deal. So again, it's our choice how we react to other people's terminology on us. So at the end of the day, we all want happiness and we want freedom from suffering. So we have to think about which way of looking at ourselves and others creates the cause of happiness and which creates the causes of suffering. And then choose. And then cultivate whatever we think is going to work to create more happiness in the world and alleviate suffering. So that's why we're here this evening. So let's remember that as our long-term motivation. So you hear me speaking about categories and identities a lot. And it's because I can see from my own experience what effect that has had on my mind throughout my life, and how it has influenced how I've related to other people and felt around other people. So I'm just trying to share a little bit of what I've come up with myself. And to see that all these categories and ideas and so on are all conceptualizations. They're all thoughts. They're things that are mind made up. And we usually don't realize it. We think that they're all very, very real. They have some objective existence and permanency such that we can't really change and we can't really get out of it. But when you really sit and think deeply about these things, we see that all the categories, all the different groups, they all exist in dependence on each other. Yeah? That if one category didn't exist, the other one couldn't either. You know, and that these things are really created by mind. And then we solidify them, we hold on to them, we have more and more conceptualization about them. We quarrel about them, we fight about them, we accuse other people of not understanding us. Of course, we don't think that maybe we haven't made an effort to understand them. That we don't think about. It's just they don't understand us. And all of this it's just stuff made up by mind. You can't even put your fingers on it. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing to be aware of. And when we can see that, it gives us so much more space in our mind instead of feeling boxed in by all these things. Mm-hmm. So it can be interesting with the EML coming up, choose one of your identities that you hold very tightly and really do some research on it. Okay, I have that identity. Then what comes out of that? What other conceptualization comes out of that? And do I ever think of all these identities or these labels or categories or names? I'm a jerk, I'm a bad person, he's an idiot. To think about how all these things depend on each other, how they're created by, wrong conception mind. So I'm not saying don't think. We have to learn how to think properly if we're going to realize emptiness. But boy, we sure have a lot of stupidagio thinking. And it creates so much pain. So try and be aware of it and, cleanse it from your mind. Realize it's all made up. And then watch your mind say, no, it's not. This is real. I am this. You don't understand. So it's interesting. An interesting thing, when your mind gets into that kind of thing, yeah, then imagine the Buddha in front, and would you say that to the Buddha? Yeah. You don't understand me. I'm this identity. I've had that experience. This is who I am. You don't understand me. Nobody understands. Would you say that to the Buddha? Do you think that's true? Yeah? You think Buddha's going to go, yep, I practiced wisdom and compassion for 3 countless great eons, and I'm not omniscient because I don't understand you. Yeah? Let's think about it. Okay. So for all of us who are intellectually handicapped and can't understand the debate book because we're hopeless students and we just don't get it and nothing's going to change, we're going to start studying debate. Okay. So, we left off last time. We had just started, we read through the first 4 points, which is to a 3-part consequence complete with a reason, so possible responses to that. So we read those 4 points. I'm going to go through this again because right after that he explains them some more, so we need to remember what they are. Do you remember what the 2 points were for if it's not a full consequence, if it's just a part? What are the 2 possible responses? Huh? Why and I accept. Okay. What does why really mean? It's a nice way to say no. Yeah. Actually, it makes sense. You're with a 3-year-old and mom's saying, have some more mashed potatoes. Why? Yeah, that kid's learning to bake. Okay. So when a challenger states a full consequence with a subject, a point of clarification, and a reason, such as, it follows that the subject, a pot, is a functioning thing because of being a product. This is of immense importance. Yeah. The defender goes to another set of questions. These are the 4 answers together with the formulas. So one thing you can say if somebody gives you a consequence with the reason is the reason is not established. So what does that mean? The what? Okay, so the property of the subject, that the reason is not the property of the subject. Okay? That's what it means when we say the reason is not established. Okay? So formulated in general, the reason that the subject has the quality of that reason is not established. So formulated with numbers, the reason that that 1, which is the subject, has the quality of that 3, which is the reason, is not established. Okay? Then, second one is there is no privation. So formulated in general, it is not the case that whatever is the reason necessarily has the quality of that predicate of the consequence. In other words, the reason, whatever is the reason is not the predicate. Okay? Formulated with numbers, it is not the case that whatever is that 3 necessarily has the quality of that 2. Okay, the third one, the privation is opposite. So, or it is a contradictory privation. So formulated in general, whatever is that reason necessarily does not have the quality of that predicate of the consequence. Or formulated with numbers, whatever is that 3, the reason, necessarily does not have the quality of that 2. Okay, so the third one is actually a type of the second one. Okay, it's just a specific type that is much clearer. And then the fourth is, yeah, I get it, or I agree, I accept it. Yeah, which may not be the right answer, but it's an answer. So, and that's formulated in general, I accept that the subject has the quality of that predicate of the consequence, or I accept that that 1, the subject, has the quality of that 2, the predicate. In other words, that the syllogism or the consequence has been proven. Okay, now we're going into all 4 of those in more depth. Okay, so the first of the 4 possible answers to a full argument is the reason is not established, which is the appropriate answer to a consequence such as the following. It follows that the subject, a pot, is a functioning thing because of being a permanent phenomena. So what's wrong with that? Don't read the book. Listen, what's wrong with saying it follows that the subject, a pot, is a functioning thing because it's a permanent phenomena? Okay. Yeah, the reason isn't established as the property of the subject. So put that in words. What is it that isn't what?
pot is not a permanent phenomenon.
Okay, so the pot is not a permanent phenomenon. Okay, so the defender answers, the reason is not established, meaning the reason that a pot is a permanent phenomenon is not established. In other words, it's hogwash. Okay? It is clearly true, as the defender's answer claims, that a pot is not permanent. Still, one might think that it would be okay to accept this consequence because it is true that a pot is a functioning thing. Okay, that subject is the predicate of the consequence. Okay, but we're not looking here if the thesis, the subject being the predicate, is correct or not. Okay, we're looking at the whole syllogism or the whole consequence. Yeah, and so the first thing we look at is the reason the property of the subject, and it isn't. Okay, so that means the whole thing's off. Yeah, so don't be tempted to say, oh yeah, I accept that because you think the thesis is correct. The thesis can be correct without the reason being established. Are you getting what I'm saying? Yeah, it can be true that a pot is impermanent, yeah, or is a functioning thing. That can be true without the pot, being permanent. Okay, but we're not looking at just that. We're looking to see if the whole syllogism makes sense. Okay, so, however, even though it is true that the pot is a functioning thing, here that is not justified because of the bad reason. Remember that a correct consequence must be one to which a defender cannot give an effective answer. Okay, so again, look at the syllogisms you make up in your life, maybe about your identities. Okay, I am stupid. I am a stupid person because I don't understand debate. Yeah? Or, that's... So on that one, you could say, oh yes, the reason does apply to the subject. I don't understand debate. Well, check up. Is that true? You really don't understand any of this? Come on. You understand something. Yeah? Don't you understand something? So, when you say, I'm a stupid person because I don't understand debate, the reason doesn't apply to the subject. Okay. So there, actually, you stop the argument there. But if you went on, what about the pervasion? Does the pervasion work in that one? Why not?
Because
just because possibly if you don't understand debate doesn't mean you're stupid. We know all kinds of other things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's no pervasion. Okay, so watch these syllogisms you say to yourself that keep you imprisoned. Yeah?
It's a recent one, but I know it's not true. I put it on myself. Jumper doesn't belong because she doesn't understand English perfectly. Or she doesn't speak and understand English perfectly.
So Jumpa is what?
Does not belong.
Oh, she doesn't belong.
Mm-hmm.
So, I see. In order to belong, you have to speak English well. Boy,
I have some reasons.
that removes most of the world, doesn't it? Wow, that's a big one. Yeah, and what is speaking English perfectly?
Yeah. Actually, first my mind was understanding it. If you don't understand what people are speaking about, for example, the American history subject, then yeah, you ask yourself what I'm doing here. So do I belong to that group? But um, but this goes a little bit off here. This topic. There are more contributions to why you belong to something. It's up to you how you think and what you find important in life. Then you have, I have other measurements for that.
Yeah. So when we tell ourselves, I don't belong, we have to actually ask ourselves what don't belong means. Yeah, what's the measurement of not belonging? Yeah. If it means that you don't understand English, then when I don't have my hearing aids in, I don't belong either. Yeah. Oh, she said it's true. I don't belong.
At least some scientists say all the people indeed people who have don't use hearing aids and they can't understand, they feel more isolated than people who use hearing aids.
Yeah. But you can either say, I feel isolated, and make yourself feel isolated, or you can sit there and laugh at the whole thing too. And think, well, if these people really wanted me to understand, they would speak louder. Because it's true. If they really did, they would, speak louder. Otherwise, they kind of start their sentences and go like this. Okay, so, okay, let's go on here. Wait, where am I? Okay. No, where the page is skipped. I know where I am, I just don't know where the book is. Okay, come on, next page. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the second four possible answers to a full argument is there is no privation, formulated in general as whatever is that reason is not necessarily that predicate of the consequence, or it is not the case that whatever is that reason is necessarily that predicate of the consequence. This is the appropriate answer to a consequence such as the following. It follows that the subject, a pot, pots are getting so much attention. Tables feel jealous because everybody talks about pots. Yeah? So, it follows that the subject, a pot, is a functioning thing because of being an established base. So, the defender says, there is no pervasion, meaning it is not the case that whatever is an established base is necessarily a functioning thing.
I know how you talk about politics.
Yeah. Okay, so it is true that a pot is an established base. Yeah. So the reason is established. However, there is no pervasion here because there are also permanent phenomena which are established bases but are not functioning things. Once again, and this is not always the case, one might think that it would be okay to accept this consequence because it is true that a pot is a functioning thing. That is true. Yeah, my political career depends on it. However, even though it is true, here it is not justified because of the bad reason. A defender could give an effective answer. Okay, which is, come on now, Yeah, that's the defender's effective answer. Okay, the third of the four possible answers to a full argument is the pervasion is opposite, or it is a contradictory pervasion, or said, do you think I'm really a jerk and I'm going to believe that? Okay, formulated in general as whatever is that reason is necessarily not that predicate of the consequence. This is the appropriate answer to the consequence that follows that the subject of pot is a permanent phenomenon because of being a functioning thing. So what's contradictory about that? What's the problem with that syllogism? Why did they say it's the pervasion is opposite?
Whatever is a functioning thing is necessarily not a permanent phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a difference between necessarily not and not necessarily. Okay. So necessarily not means that there's no way the reason is going to be the predicate. It cannot be. Okay? The not necessarily means that there may be some things that are the reason but are not the predicate. No, the opposite. No, yeah, that are not the reason but are the predicate. Okay. Okay, so that's the third one. Okay. The third of the four possible answers to a full argument, we just said that. Okay. So the defender answers the pervasion is opposite, meaning whatever is a functioning thing is necessarily not a permanent phenomena. Recall from chapter 5 two kinds of statements: that a pervasion of the form, whatever is a P, is necessarily not a Q, implies the equivalent of no P is a Q, as well as the equivalent of no Q is a P. So if you were going to draw this as diagrams, what would it look like? Yeah, two separate circles. Okay. What about the previous one, the third one, where the pervasion doesn't hold? How could that one also be? Yeah. Is it like this, or is it one thing with a small circle inside? It's the big thing with the small circle inside, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So it's helpful to draw these out, yeah, and then, you can, if you're a visual person, it helps to understand. Okay, so the force of this answer is technically included within the third answer, there is no pervasion, because in every case in which the pervasion is opposite, the response that there is no pervasion is also appropriate, though weaker. That is, if it is the case that whatever is that reason is necessarily not that predicate, then it naturally follows that it is also the case that whatever is that reason is not necessarily the predicate. Okay, so here we have the nots and the necessarilies. You have to look at them closely. That is, if it is the case that whatever is that reason is necessarily not, first the necessarily, then the not, the predicate, then it naturally follows that it is also the case that whatever is that reason is not, first the not, necessarily that predicate. Okay? Are you getting that? Are you thinking about it? Okay. If it's a statement, yeah, that we just had, where there's no pervasion, because whatever is a functioning thing is necessarily not a permanent phenomena. Okay. Then isn't it also the case that whatever is a personal, whatever is a functioning thing is not necessarily, how to say, the type of sentences that say not necessarily, it are subcategories of the type of sentences that say, oh, okay. If I draw it. Okay. So,
Push the big.
okay. So, okay. So this is the one of the predicate is necessarily not. Okay, so this is necessarily not. And this is the whole group of not necessarily. Okay? Aren't you glad I typed? I can't even read it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this one is the opposite pervasion, and this one is no pervasion. Okay? Because when there's no pervasion, we say such and such is, whatever is such and such is not necessarily this and that.
So that was the one that said the established base is not necessarily a functioning thing.
Right. Yeah. So that's the bigger circle, which is just the pervasion doesn't work. And then the pervasion is opposite, means that whatever is the reason is necessarily not the predicate. And so that's a type of, this big circle is no pervasion. Okay? So there's two kinds of no pervasions. The ones where you have not necessarily and the ones where you have necessarily not. Okay?
No, that's a big
Yes. I necessarily don't know how to work things. Okay. Okay. So it is true that a pot is a functioning thing. However, there is no pervasion here because no functioning thing is a permanent phenomena. This reason is not justified in any way, and the defender could give an effective answer and say that reason is hogwash. Okay. The force of this answer is technically included within the third answer. That's why it's a small circle and a big one. Okay. Within the third answer, there is no pervasion because in every case in which the pervasion is opposite, the reason that there is no pervasion is also, the response is that because in every case in which the pervasion is opposite, the response that there is no pervasion is also appropriate, though weaker. Okay, that is, if it is the case that whatever is the reason is necessarily not that predicate, then it naturally follows that it is also the case that whatever is that reason is not necessarily that predicate. Using the same example, if a challenger states the consequence, it follows that the subject of pot is a permanent phenomena because of being a functioning thing, then the appropriate response is the pervasion is opposite, meaning that whatever is a functional thing is necessarily not a permanent phenomena. Since it is the case that whatever is a functioning thing is necessarily not a permanent phenomena, it naturally follows that it is also the case that whatever is a functioning thing is not necessarily a permanent phenomena. To say it in another way, pointing out that the pervasion is opposite has the force of asserting no functioning things are permanent phenomena, whereas pointing out that there is no pervasion has the force of asserting some functioning things are not permanent phenomena. Okay, so if, what?
Some of them are permanent phenomena.
No, it can imply. So if here's your established base, okay, here's functioning phenomena, and here's permanent. Yeah. So if you say the reason is the opposite, it means, and this whole thing is established base. Okay? So if you say the reason is the opposite, what?
The pervasion.
The pervasion is opposite, sorry. Then it means that the functioning phenomena, because your thing was the okay, pot is permanent. Pot is permanent, okay, because of being a functioning phenomenon, okay? So, the pervasion, whatever is a functioning phenomena is permanent, that's a false pervasion. It's actually whatever is a functional phenomena is definitely not permanent. Okay, so, what did I do? So here's whatever is a functioning phenomena, all these things are definitely not this. Okay? So the pervasion is the opposite. Yeah. You could also just say whatever is a functioning phenomena is not permanent. Okay? So that's just saying it the regular way that the pervasion isn't established, which just means the same thing, that whatever is a functioning phenomena is not permanent. But when you say it's necessarily not permanent, then you're really hammering that in.
Like if they're saying that some functioning things are not permanent phenomena, it should be all functioning things are not permanent phenomena.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you say
Well, I think it's a-
not necessarily,
Uh-huh.
The microphone.
When you say functioning phenomena are not necessarily permanent, it implies that there are some functioning
Phenomena,
phenomena
yeah.
that are permanent. So
Right.
it doesn't work.
Right. With this example, it doesn't work, but it could work with, when we say, the pot is a,
Established basis.
Is
or
this-
it's an impermanent phenomenon.
because it's an impermanent phenomena. Yeah. No, or a pot
Is impermanent.
phenomena because of it an established base. Okay. Then that privation doesn't work. Right? Because whatever is an established phenomena is not necessarily a permanent or a functioning thing. Right. Yeah. Okay.
The way he's got it here, that they both are.
Yeah, that, okay.
Not literally true.
Yeah.
Well, it's not true at all.
Well, let's go back and find that sentence.
Some functioning things are not permanent, and all functioning things are not permanent.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, here it is. To say it another way, pointing out that the privation is opposite has the force of asserting no functioning things are permanent phenomena, whereas pointing out that there is no privation has the force of asserting some functioning things are not permanent phenomena. That's correct. Yeah, it has the force of asserting some, but that's not true because some functioning things are not permanent phenomena.
But that's implying that some are.
Yeah. Naturally, if no functioning things are permanent phenomena, then some, in fact, all functioning things are not permanent phenomena. So he agrees with us there. But then why did he say the other thing?
I don't
If-
think
Maybe it's just the rules of debate, that you can say that.
Yeah, it's true statement.
Yeah.
Some functioning things are not permanent, it's a true statement.
It's true, it's just.
And they can throw somebody else.
Some functioning things are not permanent phenomena. Oh, that is true. But because sometimes things are, but that implies that maybe not all.
Some of them are
That's what's
permanent
not
phenomena.
true.
That's what's not true.
The implication that we're seeing is not true.
Yeah. Okay. So naturally, if no functioning things are permanent phenomena, then some, in fact, all functioning things are not permanent phenomena. Okay. So maybe he's just saying, okay, if you're not aware of that, it could sound like you're implying, you're implying that instead of, when you say it's opposite, you're implying this. When you say there's no privation, it could also be this.
Yes, he's making a case.
Yeah.
For why do you use the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite makes it very clear it's this,
Yeah.
whereas just the privation doesn't fit. It could also be this, because no privation could be either of those. Right? Okay. Okay. Thus, statements of privation for which not necessarily is appropriate, and did I skip something? If a defender is faced with a consequence to which the answer that the privation is opposite is appropriate, this is a stronger and more specific answer than merely pointing out that there is no privation. Because you're saying it's this, and there's no chance it's going to be that. Okay? However, that this does not go the other way around. The lack of privation does not imply that the privation is opposite. Okay? Yeah. Thus, 1, statements of privation for which not necessarily is appropriate, which includes both of those examples, and statements of privation for which necessarily not is appropriate, which refers only to this one, Okay, compare as 3P. You may like to remember this point, as necessarily not implies not necessarily, but not necessarily. My page skipped. Wait, my page skipped. But not necessarily does not necessarily imply necessarily not. Oh, that's a good one. That goes on the bathroom mirror. Necessarily not implies not necessarily, but not necessarily does not necessarily imply necessarily not. Yeah. Okay. So these two kinds of statements compare as 3P. So it could be good. Oh, I made an example of that and it got erased. Oh, yes. So let's those two kinds of statements compare as 3P. So what is an example of a statement that is both not necessarily and necessarily not?
Things that are dichotomies.
Yeah, things that are dichotomy, and give an example. We just had one. No, I see. Yeah, wait. Yeah, things that are, no, let's say, what's an example of a consequence or a syllogism that are both necessarily not and not necessarily?
A correct one or?
Yeah, anything. Okay. Yeah, because the syllogism is not going to be correct. Okay. So that one, it follows that the subject of pot is a permanent phenomena because of being a functioning thing. So is that an example of an opposite pervasion and just a regular pervasion? Yes. Okay, so that's an example of necessarily not necessarily. Okay. What is an example of something that is an incorrect pervasion but is not an opposite pervasion? Yeah?
Follows that the subject,
Oh.
one on the previous page.
Yeah.
Both that the subject of pot is a functioning thing because of being an established base.
Yeah. Okay. So that one is the pervasion doesn't work, but it's not an opposite pervasion. Okay. Now, is there anything that where the pervasion doesn't work, but it is an opposite pervasion? So something that is not a something that is a pervasion. No, that is not a pervasion, but is not an opposite pervasion. No.
Something is the opposite of provision, but not the neither.
No. Something. Maybe we have to go back to 2. Okay.
You're not looking for neither yet, right?
No,
Okay.
we're not looking for neither. We're doing the 2 middle ones. Okay. So something that is that is not a pervasion, but is not an opposite pervasion, was what she just said. The follows the subject is a functioning thing because of being an established base. Because that is not a pervasion, but it's not an opposite pervasion. Okay. Now, is there something that is not a privation, but is an opposite privation? No, there's nothing. And then what is something that is neither? What's an example of a statement that is neither, that has neither an opposite privation nor just no privation?
I lack inherent existence because I'm a dependent arising.
Yeah. You know, the pot is empty of inherent existence because of being a dependent arising.
Could be one that you could accept.
Yeah. Yeah. So one that is neither. Yeah. Okay? So it's confusing, but by going through this, it helps you learn what these things mean. Yeah? Otherwise, we just kind of say, well, yeah, okay, I don't really get it, but let's go on to the next point. Okay? Are you ready to go on to the next point? Or should we make another example of this? Let's do another example. Okay. So, what is both not a privation and an opposite privation? What's a statement where the privation doesn't work and the privation is an opposite privation? Yeah.
A rabbit's horn isn't existent because it is a non-existent.
Choose another one. Talk about some things that are existent, okay?
Let's see.
Yeah, because we can't really have a non. Can we have a non-existent as the subject of a syllogism?
No, it doesn't have any properties.
Huh?
It doesn't have any properties.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay. A tree is a person because it is a sentient being. Tree is a person because
it's a
it is
sen-
not a sentient being.
Because it is not a sentient being. Okay, so what is not a privation about that?
Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person.
Right. And what is an opposite privation about that?
Well, whatever is not a person, whatever is a person is necessarily not a sentient being.
No, that's not the opposite privation. Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person.
Oh, it'd be not a sentient being. Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person.
Yeah,
Hmm?
isn't it? If you're not a sentient being, you can't be a person. Whatever is not a sentient being is not a person.
Incorrect reason.
Yeah.
If you were checking the privation there, you would say whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily a person. That would be the privation of that syllogism.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's try this. Okay, so what was your syllogism again? A tree, yeah, was a tree
Is a person
is a person
because it is not a sentient being.
because it's not a sentient being. Okay. Okay, so just the privation just the privation work? What's the privation?
Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily a person.
That would be the regular.
That whatever is not a sentient being
Is necessarily a person.
necessarily a person.
That's
the
the
regular.
That's the way it should, if the privation worked. Whatever is not a sentient being is a privation.
Necessarily a person.
Is necessarily a person. But that is an incorrect privation because whatever is not a sentient being is not a person.
So you say,
Yeah, that is hard.
You know, let's do something without a not. Okay, that will make it easier. Okay, so do you want to make one without a not? Or it's good for us to think through the not. You know.
so your response to this is
Medical
no probation.
microphone so we can hear you.
So when we see this, we say the response is no privation. Because actually the first thing works. A tree is not a sentient being, so that's fine. You have to establish that first, and then you go to the privation. You have to say no privation.
Yeah, whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person.
And then the question is can you say the privation is opposite? And that would be formulated that whatever is that reason, not a sentient being, is necessarily not that predicate of the consequence, or necessarily not a person. And that is true. So you could say the privation is opposite. So it's formulated, the privation is opposite is formulated, whatever is that reason, not a sentient being,
Not a sentient being.
is necessarily not that predicate of the consequence, necessarily not a person. Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person. That's true. So
Wait a minute, the first part, whatever is not the reason.
no, I don't think. Well, maybe I got that wrong. I copied it out of the book wrong, maybe. But let me double check.
How about something simple? The other way.
No, let's just.
It's having a not in it that makes it confusing. Okay.
The
one-
weather-
One without a not.
No.
How about the weather today is hot because it's cold?
Okay.
It's just simple.
Okay. Weather, is hot because it's cold. Okay, this is much easier. Okay, so if you were trying to establish the privation, it would be whatever is cold is necessarily hot.
Right.
That's wrong.
Right.
Okay? Okay, so the privation doesn't hold. Then the opposite privation would be whatever is cold is necessarily not hot.
Right. So it's right. Whatever is that reason is necessarily not that predicate of the consequence. Whatever is that reason, whatever is cold, is necessarily not.
hot. So whatever is not
No, whatever.
a sentient being.
Right.
No.
No.
Whatever
It's
is cold.
Whatever is that reason is
Not
necessarily
necessarily not, okay, so whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person.
That's wrong.
It is, it's correct in that it's opposite, it's not.
Whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person. That's true.
That's true. And what
That's
you're doing
true.
there is you're using the general formulation of whatever is that reason is necessarily not that predicate of the consequence. Whatever is that reason,
Is necessarily
not
not.
that predicate of the consequence. That's the general
So
formulation.
whatever is not a sentient being is necessarily not a person. So is that an example of a statement that is both an incorrect privation and an opposite privation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so we figured out the first one. Then, what's an example of something that is not a privation, but isn't an opposite privation? Something that is not a correct privation, but is not an opposite privation.
The weather is hot because it's windy.
Okay, so let's try that. Weather is hot because it's windy. Okay. Windy! So, okay, so the privation would be, if it's windy, it must be hot. No privation. Okay. If it's windy, is it necessarily not hot? No. So this would be an example of something that is not a privation, but is not an opposite privation. Now, is there an example of something that is not a privation, but is an opposite privation? No. Okay, why? Because they're like this. Okay. And then is there something that is neither? Example. You just gave one, Venerable. Venerable said, oh, you gave one.
The self lacks inherent existence because it's a dependent arising.
Yeah. So in that one, it's the privation is okay. And so it's also not a opposite privation. Yeah.
In other words, it's correct. It's correct.
It's correct, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's good to put all the knots in there, huh? Okay. Okay. So now we're on the fourth and final of the four possible answers to a full argument is I accept it. Whew. This is the one answer that is in both sets of answers. This would be the appropriate response to this argument. In both sets of answers, meaning when it's just a snippet and when it's a full statement. Okay. So this would be the appropriate response to this argument. It follows that the subject, a pot, is a functioning thing because of being a product. Okay, so that's a correct one. Here, I accept means I accept that a pot is a functioning thing. According to Demolocho Rinpoche, it is a point of etiquette in debate that when the challenger has stated a full argument with a reason and the defender wants to accept it, the defender does not simply say, I accept it, but spells out the answer in full, saying, I accept that the subject is that predicate. So note well, these four answers in response to a full argument with a reason could be used equally to answer a syllogism or a consequence. Okay? Then also note well, the defender should always try to give the right answer. Many times I have seen American students accepting an unwanted consequence of their original bad assertions, often smiling and looking around, knowing full well that they were in the wrong. Okay, this is called Trump politics. Yeah. I mean, can I just give an example? So last night he did a rally in North Carolina, and he was bad-mouthing he was criticizing the squad, and the crowd started chanting, what was it? He said, yeah, send her back, send her back. Okay? Meaning send her back to the country that she came from, because he had said that before, that anybody who doesn't like America should just, they're welcome to leave. So the whole crowd was chanting joyfully, send her back, send her back. And Trump was looking around taking it all in. Then, this morning, there was a lot of bad press about that, and people saying, that's a completely inappropriate thing to say. Yeah. And so he said, I didn't agree with that statement, and I didn't make it happen. Yeah. So it's the same thing here. You know you're wrong because the video proved him wrong, that he did make it happen. He didn't try and stop it. But he said, I disagreed, and I didn't do anything. It was all the crowd, kind of. They thought of that themselves without me. So it's an example, exactly what he said here. Okay? Yeah? So I'm not talking politics. I'm giving a real example of what the book says. Okay.
Okay, the next one's even more sure.
What? Okay. So often smiling and looking around, knowing full well that they were in the wrong. But you still, assert what you say, and you cover up obfuscate, whatever that word is. Perhaps the American students hang on even after things are going badly because we are so resistant to admitting when we were wrong. Any chance that that statement is true? But this is not the way of Buddhist debate. Okay, if you are speaking as a defender in a formal debate setting or not, and you realize your mistake, the thing you should do is admit it and accept punishment, which is nothing more than a big fat saw in your face. So we can all look at a picture of Trump and go, saw! Okay. It is better to be embarrassed and learn to have a willingness to change your position on things than to not learn at all. It is a good way to be in education, politics, and life in general. It's true, isn't it? When you say the wrong thing, you should admit it and not say, well, no, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that, blah, 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 whatever it is. Okay, note well, you may have perceived it already, but there is a rule of the system that it is appropriate to give the answers. There is no pervasion, and the pervasion is opposite, if and only if the reason is not established. Is established. Good. Glad you're thinking. I didn't say it wrong. It's not that I misread, it's I was just testing you to see if you were paying attention. Yeah, right? Okay. If the reason is not established, that is where the defender has to go first. This also means that for an argument in which both the reason is not established and there is no pervasion, such as it follows that the argument of pot is a valid See, I'm testing you again. Yeah, I read it. I know what it really said. I was just testing again to see if you were paying attention. It follows that the subject of pot is a valid cognizer because of being a consciousness. Okay? So what's wrong with that? It makes sense, doesn't it? It follows that the subject of pot is a valid cognizer because of being a consciousness. Yeah? And it follows that if you say something that disagrees with the president, you should leave the country. Yeah, that's dangerous, isn't it? That's very dangerous. Okay. Oops. Okay. the defender first has to deny the establishment of the reason. What does that mean in that argument? Which means what?
A pot is not a consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So the defender first has to deny the establishment of the reason, in this case by saying the reason that a pot is a consciousness is not established. The backing for this procedure in Buddhist reasoning and debate has to do with the three modes of a correct sign and the order for understanding them. Yeah, so first we have to understand the property of the subject, and second, the forward pervasion, and third, the counter pervasion. But if you understand the forward pervasion, you already know that the counter pervasion is okay. Thus, in order for the second and third modes of the sign, or I would say criteria, to be established, the first criteria, the property of the subject, must first be established. That entails that a fully qualified opponent must ascertain by reliable cognition, the property of the subject in the syllogism at hand. So if the opponent is not fully qualified and doesn't understand that, then the syllogism, even if all the statements are true, the syllogism doesn't work. It's not a valid syllogism because it doesn't apply to the mentality of the person it's addressed to. So this is really emphasizing the importance of skillful means, of not just saying the right thing or doing the right thing, but being skillful at it. Okay, using the syllogism that is the standard for explaining Buddhist rules of logic for certain persons, okay, product is a correct sign in the syllogism. The subject sound is an impermanent phenomena because of being a product. Okay, recall from chapter 6, the Buddhist syllogism, that each of the three criteria of a correct sound has an epistemological requirements for the person to whom the argument is stated. Thus, even if the sign is a property of the subject in the real world, and the forward pervasion and counter pervasion are true to the way things are in the world, they do not hold as components of a correct sign unless they are ascertained as such by the person to whom the argument is stated. Okay? So you really have to think of who you're talking to when you talk. Otherwise, you could say lots of nice things that are true, and the person doesn't get anything out of it. Okay? For instance, it may be that the pervasion in the same syllogism above, that all products are impermanent phenomena, is true in the sense of being the way things are in the world. However, even if that is the case, if the reason is not established, that pervasion is not reliable or valid with respect to asserting a correct sign. It simply does not apply. Okay, so we always check to see if the reason is established first. Yeah? Because if the reason isn't established, then the rest of it doesn't matter. Okay. Now you could say, well, why not do the pervasion first? Because if the pervasion doesn't work, then the reason definitely is, then the whole thing is also wrong. So why do you think that we establish the reason before we establish the pervasion?
Because the reason is what's proving the pervasion. I mean, the predicate. The thesis.
Yeah, but why not just go directly and just, and to see why not make your first thing just seeing if the pervasion works?
Because theoretically, you don't understand the pervasion unless you've understood the reason. You're using the reason to You're using the reason to prove the predicate.
Yeah, but you understand the reason, you understand impermanent or whatever it is.
Yeah. On the basis of understanding that, then the thesis is proven.
Yeah, but my question is, he's saying when you investigate a syllogism or a consequence, the first of the three criteria you look at is to see if the reason applies to the subject. My question is, why do you think that it isn't the first thing you look at is to check if the reason applies to the predicate, if the privation holds? Why do we first look to see if the sign is established and don't first look to see if the privation is correct? Why do you think? Yeah. That's my question.
I would think it's because in the subject is a smaller thing, generally, like it's more, it's usually an instance.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have more familiarity with that and understanding that that the reason applies to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could actually know that, whereas you might not know these big generalities that are then these pervasions and counter pervasions that usually are collections of instances.
Yeah, because it's much easier to know, to assess whether the reason is established than to assess whether the privation works. Okay, because saying sound is a product is much easier to understand or to ascertain, oh yeah, that's correct, than to ascertain that if it's a product, it's necessarily impermanent. So you do what's easier first.
Clarification to establish the reason. That's the same as the first mode, which you have to verify the property of the subject.
Yeah,
there's the same thing.
Establish the reason
Is
means
by
establish that
establishing
the
the
reason is a property of the subject. It's shorthand for establishing that the reason is the property of the subject. So that is easier to do than to know that the privation is correct. Okay? Yeah, do you agree?
No, I'm puzzled why what I said doesn't make sense. Because
Yeah, say what you said again.
the whole purpose of this is to help someone who's not ascertained the thesis to understand the thesis. So we have to understand if the property of the subject is in the sign, because we're using the sign to prove the larger truth of the thesis itself.
Yeah, you have to understand that the sign applies to the subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be the reason that you would do that first?
Well, why is that? Why do we do that first? It's easier to understand than the privation.
Yes.
And also, we're talking about that specific thing.
Right, but we're using privation to prove the thesis itself.
Yeah.
So looking for, if you already knew the privation without checking the sign, there'd be no point in having the syllogistic argument, because you already know all the parts.
No. If you just check the privation, if you check the privation without checking the sign, you're not going to have something. But similarly, if you check the sign without checking the privation, you're also not going to have an argument.
Right, but the sign has to work in order, the sign has to be a property of the subject.
Right.
In order for the privation to even be pursued.
Right, but the privation also has to be a property of the predicate for it to be a valid argument.
Yes.
Yes. So I was just saying, why is it one? Do you check one first rather than the other when it's the truth that without one or without the other, the argument doesn't work. Okay. So, for instance, it may be that the pervasion in the sample syllogism above, that all products are impermanent phenomena, is true in the sense of being the way things are in the world. However, even if that is the case, if the reason is not established, that pervasion is not reliable with respect to asserting a correct sign. It simply does not apply. What is important, and what we should keep in mind, is whether or not the syllogism is reliable or valid. The validity of the syllogism taken as a whole is what determines the truth and correctness of its components. So if one of the three criteria is wrong, the whole thing is wrong. Okay? So if one component holds, but the other two fail, the syllogism is not valid, and thus its components are not true or correct. Yeah, even if taken alone, one of them may be correct, because the whole syllogism is wrong, everything is. Even if that pervasion holds, in all cases in the real world, it cannot be considered to be true for a person who does not understand, such as a person who does not understand speech, nor a person who is not seeking to know the truth of the pervasion, such as a person who has already understood it. Yeah, or a person who just isn't even interested in the topic. Thus, the pervasion cannot be true for such persons, and the syllogism would not be a valid argument. That the reason must be established in order for pervasion to be true seems to imply that, okay, now this is getting into a whole different thing. Okay? What? It's a good place to stop, so we will stop here. Okay, did you read the upcoming section? Yeah, did you understand it? Kind of, yeah, it's a little bit difficult, okay, because it's talking about Western proof statements, you know, and also because the way he explained it, you can tell the way he explained it, he's not 100% certain about it, but also because what he meant by P and what he meant by Q, it's not always clear. We have to go over that and think about his examples, what he means by P. Does he mean the establishing the reason? And Q, does he mean pervasion? Or, you know, what does he mean when he says, if P, then Q? So we have to, you know, go over it a little bit and see if you can figure it out. Yeah. Yeah? Uh-huh.
So based on what we were just talking about, that it's important to establish the reason first. Then of the four possible answers, the fourth one that we went through earlier tonight, the fourth one says, I accept that the subject has the quality of that predicate. We're not even looking at the reason there.
No, it means that you've looked at both. You've
looked at the whole thing.
Yeah,
not
you've
just
looked at the
shorthand.
whole thing. You've seen that the reason applies to the subject. You've seen that the pervasion works. So then you say, I accept it.
So that was just kind of shorthand the way he wrote it.
Huh?
He
What?
just sort of wrote it in shorthand then.
Yeah, accept means I accept that I understand the syllogism and it works. Yeah. Of course, if you say that and the syllogism doesn't work, then the challenger is going to come back and say, you know, throw a consequence at you. Yeah.
It's just kind of funny the way he wrote it, that he doesn't mention the reason. He just says the subject has the quality of that predicate.
Yeah, you're accepting the thesis. But it...
It's based on the three norms.
Now, this is... He just says the fourth and final of the four possible answers to a full argument is I accept it. This is the one answer that is in both sets of answers. This would be the appropriate response to this argument. It follows that the subject to pot is a functioning thing because of being a product. Here, I accept it means I accept that the pot is a functioning thing. So you're accepting the whole thesis. Yeah, which means if you're going to accept the whole thesis, you have to have checked those three criteria, okay? Yeah?
Would it be proper to say a product why? Like, Venerable, would it be okay to answer a product why?
Of here to the thing that is saying that subject to pot is a functioning thing because of being a product.
In order to get more clarification, could you answer a pot is a product is a product why?
No, if you didn't understand that syllogism, if somebody says it follows that the subject to pot is an impermanent thing because of being a product, or is a functioning thing because of being a product, if you don't understand that syllogism, yeah, you could say why, and then the other person would throw a consequence at you. They would probably say, then it follows that the pot is not a product because of not being a functioning thing, or they would say some kind of ridiculous thing that would help you to understand the syllogism or the consequence correctly.
You wouldn't say why.
Huh?
You wouldn't say why.
No, if you didn't understand the syllogism, if somebody says to you, okay, a pot is a functioning thing because of being a product, and you don't get that syllogism, then how are you going to respond?
You would have to say either reason not established or no pervasion. Those are, or opposite pervasion. You know, you have those four choices.
Why is one of the four acceptable?
Not for a full syllogism. No.
It's only for the housing part.
No,
No, look, he just gave us four answers.
Yes,
and
and
a
it's
syllogism or a full consequence.
yes. So this is a full syllogism.
Yes. So
So one
Why
of the
is not
four
one of the four
answers is. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, is the pervasion not as?
The four are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you would say one of those four, and then the challenger would correct you or do a consequence.
yeah. At that point, if you really didn't accept that syllogism, you would have to give either you're not accepting that the reason is established, or that there's pervasion. That's
Right, or you're not accepting the pervasion. Yeah. Or the whole thing's above your head and you just don't get it. Yeah. So, yeah, that's true. So you would, why would not be one of the answers you give. Yeah. You would have to say something wrong in order to get corrected.
That's a very good question. I'm wondering I'm wondering because the first answer that you have the choice of giving really is the first one. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if the person really didn't have a clue if that might be the best answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because then what happens after that? We haven't really learned that yet in the book.
Depends if it's a consequence or a statement.
Yeah. No, but if you can't establish that
if you say the reason is
a product of
then
the
what does the challenger do next? But see, we haven't gotten to that part in the book. We're only in the beginning, the first volley of answers. So I don't really know the answer. But
what's your question?
My question is doesn't it? It seems to me because of the order of which you give these answers,
right?
You always have to first establish the property of the reason and the property of the subject. So in this situation,
You don't have a reason at that point. If someone's
If you don't understand something at all and you have the choice of 4 answers, I'm asking, don't you think it'd be reasonable to give the first of the possible 4 answers? Because that...
Yeah, unless you understood that the property is...
I'm saying you don't understand anything.
If you don't understand anything, then I would say yes,
answer,
give the first of the 4 answers.
Yeah, and then what would happen?
Don't you think?
Because then...
The first of the 4 answers is to say that the...
Yeah, it throws it back to the challenger, and then the challenger's got to, what do they do? I don't know. We haven't
No, it doesn't. The challenger's going to throw it back to you.
If the reason is established, they will
if there's a
challenge you.
syllogism, it follows that the subject of pot is a functioning thing because of being an established base, and you don't understand anything. So the first thing you start with is what I don't understand is that a pot being an established base. So I say the reason is not established, meaning I don't understand that the pot is an established base. Yeah. And so then the challenger would probably, what is he going to do to help me understand that that the pot is an established base? Maybe the challenger would say the pot is an established base because it is what's the definition of established base? A phenomena known by consciousness or whatever it is. Established by a valid cognizer. So they would say that, and then you would understand that. And then if you didn't understand the second part, if you still didn't understand it, then you would say no pervasion. And then the guy would say, yeah? Is that? Yeah, okay. Okay, so we're leaving off with the reason must be established in order for the pervasion to be true.